With a marine area almost 24 times larger than its land area, the potential for Jamaica's blue economy to serve as a significant catalyst for economic growth and diversification depends on the innovative and sustainable management of its marine resources. My name is Dominique Graham, Project Coordinator of the One City Project at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, CAPRI. CAPRI is an independent think tank dedicated to evidence-based research towards improved public policy making in Jamaica and in the Caribbean. Today, we launch our second report for 2024, titled Sea of Opportunity: Developing Jamaica's Blue Economy. The research that informed this report was carried out under the EU project Civil Society Organizations as Actors of Governance and Development. The EU has been a consistent partner in enabling CAPRI to carry out its mission to conduct data-driven public policy research throughout our entire 17-year existence. This study was conceptualized out of the need to explore methods for further economic diversification, a goal that CAPRI is also keen on participating in. It analyzes the opportunity for further development of Jamaica's blue economy with a view to addressing these issues and providing long-term social, economic, and environmental benefits. Tonight's event will proceed as follows. We will have remarks from the EU Ambassador in Jamaica, Her Excellency Marianne Van Steen, followed by a presentation of the report's findings by Ms. Rayanne Mackenzie, Assistant Researcher on the study. Subsequently, there will be a panel discussion facilitated by CAPRI's Director of Research, Dr. Diana Thorburn, with panelists Mr. Christopher Corbin, Coordinator of the Cartagena Convention Secretariat, and Professor Dale Weber, Director of the Center for Marine Sciences at the University of the West Indies, Mona. I now turn over to Ambassador Van Steen.
As small island developing states, countries of the Caribbean region, including Jamaica, are pursuing, or should be pursuing, a holistic approach to managing the resources of the ocean, focusing on the sustainable extraction of marine assets to improve their economic development and production possibilities. Everyone does agree that it is critical that these activities protect the long-term health of marine and coastal ecosystems for future generations. However, we may not all acknowledge that the impact of how we manage our oceans will also determine our survival on land. With this understanding growing, the concept of the blue economy has received increasing attention over the past decade, and rightly so. One of our high authorities in the European Union, the European Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fisheries, made it very clear that the transition to a greener, more sustainable economy will be impossible without the support of industries based around the ocean and coasts, known as the blue economy. And in response to that, only a few years ago, the European Union started to implement a new strategy for a sustainable blue economy, covering a wide range of policy issues, from responsible food systems to decarbonization, as well as biodiversity, coastal resilience, and circularity, all elements focusing on bringing about environmental, social, and economic sustainability. It's important to note that being responsible with our oceans is not a loss, but can equally be a win in economic terms. Our Blue Economy report in the European Union for last year estimated that the sector employs close to 5 million people and generates around 750 billion euro in turnover. And according to OECD projections, the blue economy could outperform the growth of the global economy as a whole by 2030, both in terms of value added and in terms of employment. Turning to Jamaica now, as noted in the CAPRI report, Jamaica's adoption of the blue economy concept is also a promising avenue for economic growth and sustainable development, particularly in tourism, fisheries, and blue finance. It does, however, also call for caution, as one cannot neglect challenges such as overfishing, unsustainable tourism practices, competition for resources between coastal industries, and, of course, the impact of climate change. As a matter of fact, if the blue economy represents an important economic potential, there is indeed a significant need to balance growth with conservation, development with ecological considerations, and large investments with social considerations, such as the needs of small-scale earners who depend entirely upon the sector for their survival. It's therefore my hope that this report will be communicated to the responsible duty bearers in the government and to the private sector to ensure that policy development, implementation, investments, and monitoring of the ongoing developments in Jamaica's blue economy result in the country achieving economic prosperity, as well as the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially those related to climate action and life below water. All of that, not just to support the survival of our oceans, but also our survival on land. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Thorburn will be piloting the rest of this evening's event. But before that, we want you to fully engage with us during this event. My colleague Morgan will explain to you just how you can do so. Morgan?
Hi there, I'm so glad you could join us. We have an exciting program lined up. In true CAPRI style, we've done the research and packaged it just for you. If you're new here, stay tuned, there's much to be learned. Want to know how you can participate in the discussion? We'll be using Slido, which is the ultimate Q&A and polling platform for live and virtual meetings and events. It's super easy to use and very interactive. First, you will need to open a browser on your device. Type in slido.com. You will be asked to enter an event code. We're keeping it simple, so our event code is CAPRI. Once you've entered the code CAPRI, you are live. From here, you will be able to send in your questions, upvote the questions of others, and participate in live polls. We recommend stating your name and location, but this is not required. Now you're all set to engage with us throughout this event. Thanks for your participation, and we look forward to your questions.
Quite easy, right? The steps are also shared below, so you can log on and ask your questions. It's now time for the main event. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Dominique and Morgan, and good evening to our audience. Thank you for joining us for this evening's launch of this very important report on the blue economy in Jamaica. We do have the panel here. I'll introduce them when we're about to get to the panel discussion. But just to test how closely you're paying attention to Morgan, I'd like to invite you to go to Slido to answer the first poll question that is there. And then when I come back, I will announce the results of that poll. So you can go ahead and find the Slido poll and get acquainted with the app and start participating. We're now going to have the presentation of the report and its findings by Rhiann McKenzie, the co-researcher on this study. Go ahead and find
Jamaica's blue economy presently constitutes 7% of the nation's total GDP. However, with the implementation of appropriate policies, this figure holds the potential to double or even surpass that percentage over time. Development of the blue economy promises a prosperous and eco-conscious future for Jamaica, where economic growth can align seamlessly with environmental stewardship. Globally, ocean assets have been valued at a staggering $24 trillion, which represents the economic opportunities presented by ocean resources. The value added by the annual ocean economy is set to reach $3 trillion by 2030, which tells us that ocean-related activities can be major contributors to global economic prosperity. This also provides compelling evidence to governments to capitalize on the blue economy model. With that being said, research shows that there are significant risks to Jamaica's blue economy, including overfishing, climate change, ocean acidification, and poor waste management. The report focuses on three main sectors that heavily influence Jamaica's blue economy, namely the tourism sector, fisheries, and blue finance. The current tourism model directly contributes 11% to GDP. However, research shows a decline in value when compared to other economic sectors. Jamaica can diversify its tourism sector and create value-added experiences by embracing the blue economy model, incorporating ecotourism and marine tourism into the current model, which is gaining popularity and aligns with sustainable and responsible tourism. A significant proportion of visitors to the island are already involved in marine tourism activities, and the potential for associating a fee to these visitors is quite plausible. Ecotourism activities can be promoted and offered by hotels and should be linked with marine parks in order to financially support conservation efforts. The report encourages a comprehensive review of the current tourism model, incorporating more community-based and ecotourism initiatives to offset the negative environmental impacts often associated with the sector. Also, assess coastal impacts of tourism and identify offsetting mechanisms and environmentally friendly activities within current tourism offerings, such as mangrove and coral restoration, education, and awareness programs. Another major contributor to Jamaica's blue economy lies in the fisheries sector. There is a decline in fisheries production, which research has attributed to factors such as coastal development, unsustainable fishing practices, and climate change. The report highlights considerations for a sustainable fisheries sector where certain factors must be addressed, such as import dependency, coastal management, declining fish stock, and marine sanctuaries. There is also an emphasis on the need for comprehensive stakeholder engagements with fisherfolk to ensure that solutions towards sustainable fisheries align with their preferences to avoid conflict. Invest in modernizing fishing infrastructure and increase production of value-added products to reduce post-harvest losses. Provide financial incentives to encourage sustainable fishing practices and foster the development of the aquaculture sector. Support fisherfolk with alternative livelihood opportunities, capacity building and training, which will allow for diversification within the sector and reduce overexploitation of local resources. Last but not least, we have the blue finance sector. There are already existing initiatives within the sector, but it is insufficient to meet the increasing demand for conservation efforts. Therefore, new sustainable finance mechanisms should be explored and established. With Jamaica's strategic geographic location in the Caribbean, there is a potential to establish a regional sustainable finance hub focused on blue, green, and climate financing opportunities aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. The implementation of blue and green bonds can generate capital for a wide range of projects that facilitate a more sustainable blue economy. Given the income generated by the tourism sector and its dependency on a resilient environment, a greater portion of funds managed by the Tourism Enhancement Fund should be allocated to environmental projects that prioritize climate resilience. The development of a payment for ecosystem services approach that includes a blue carbon framework to create strategies to quantify and assess carbon stocks. How can the government NGOs, and private entities access blue finance. There is a range of local, regional, and global opportunities that exist for blue and green financing, such as the World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and the Caribbean Development Bank, which Jamaica can explore. The report delves into a number of mechanisms that can be applied to generate finance for sustainable blue economy initiatives, such as environmental levies, arrival fees, environmental fines, blue and green bonds, and diaspora incentives. Funds should be prioritized specifically to projects or programs that support and promote climate resilience. One of the main takeaways is the need for increased collaboration and partnerships among these sectors to promote conservation initiatives. Other recommendations include stakeholder consultations to ensure all involved parties are working towards the sustainable objectives for development of the blue economy. A comprehensive marine spatial plan prioritizing ocean protection in alignment with Jamaica's commitment to the High Ambition Coalition for 30 by 30, which states a 30% of ecosystems protected by 2030. As Jamaica has an expansive maritime space, effective management of the economic exclusive zone through use of monitoring, control, and surveillance systems is paramount. Establish carrying capacity thresholds in both tourism and fisheries sectors, preventing resource depletion, environmental degradation, and social strain. Utilize Jamaica's geographic location to establish a regional sustainable finance hub focused on blue finance and climate financing opportunities aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, and the development of a payment for ecosystem services approach, including the Blue Carbon Framework. It is evident that Jamaica's blue economy reveals a unique opportunity for sustainable growth, emphasizing responsible practices in tourism, fisheries, and finance sectors. In order to maximize the benefits from the blue economy, an integrated approach between these sectors is required.
Thank you, Rianne, for that presentation. And of course, we will get an opportunity in the panel discussion to talk more about the report and the findings. I'd like to introduce our panelists this evening, who we're very happy to have with us. We have Mr. Christopher Corbin, the coordinator of United Nations Environmental Program and of the Cartagena Convention Secretariat. And I'm actually going to ask you in a minute to just say a little bit about that. Rianne herself, one of the co-researchers on the study, and Professor Dale Webber, now director of the Center for Marine Sciences at the University of the West Indies. And the poll results so the question was, how much, if anything at all, do you know about the blue economy? And half of the respondents said little knowledge, and half said somewhat knowledgeable. No one said expert knowledge, which is why we have you. And so I want to use this opportunity in asking you in the first question I'm going to put to you for the panel, is to just give some insight into what the work you are doing as it relates to the blue economy, keeping in mind that many of the people who will be watching this and who will be participating in the discussion are clearly here because they want to learn a bit more. You know, I will say that, you know, for CAPRI, this is the first time we're doing research on the blue economy. So it was a new area for us as well. And I think there's a great deal of interest in it, particularly as it pertains to so many things that we are familiar with, things that came out in Rianne's presentation of the report. So I'll start with you, Mr. Corbin. If you could just tell us, what is the Cartagena Convention and what does it have to do with the blue economy?
Thank you so much, Diana, and again, a sort of warm good evening to all our listeners. The Cartagena Convention is a program of regional seas. So a program that seeks to protect regional seas globally, and our secretariat focuses specifically on the Caribbean Sea. We have been honored to be hosted here in Jamaica since the convention was first set up in 1983. And our major focus is working with governments, including the government of Jamaica, on the protection and development of the Caribbean Sea. Recognizing that all of our livelihoods, whether it be tourism, fishing, maritime transportation, all depend on the Caribbean Sea. And I think the concept now of blue economy, if for persons who are listening, is how do we continue to maximize on the opportunities provided by the resource which surrounds us all, but in a more sustainable fashion? And how do we recognize new opportunities that the sea now offers us? So we're hoping we're helping a little in this journey, but we are certainly happy to see this greater focus on blue economy, engagement of private sector, engagement of communities, which is so critical to move forward.
Before I go to you, Rian, Professor Weber, tell us what the UE Center for Climate Change is doing and what it has to do with the blue economy.
Well, I'll tell you about the Center for Marine Sciences.
Marine Sciences, I'm sorry.
The Center for Climate Change. So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank CAPRI for the work it continues to do, bringing to light so much information. So the University of the West Indies is the research entity that provides that bit of information. It provides an opportunity to find information, to find resources, put them together so that we can answer questions. We are the first port of call for any entity that wants more information, more knowledge about how to take a decision, how to act on it. The blue economy, of course, now is linked to the university through our Center for Marine Sciences with our two marine laboratories, Port Royal Marine Laboratory and Discovery Bay Marine Laboratory, where, as Rian mentioned in her presentation, if we're looking at mangrove, seagrass, coral reefs, those are essential ecosystems that are part of the ecosystem services that we spoke of. And if we're going to talk about restoration, then those are features from our labs, which both labs participate in. But we'd rather do conservation rather than restoration, because we'd like to keep as much of it as it is. But beyond that, we have partnerships and opportunities to work with the shipping industry, with port facilities, because the blue economy, for those of you who are looking for a definition, it is anything that happens in the water, in the oceans, in our space, which, as just said, 24 times larger than our land space. So for us, Jamaica being an island, everything around us, it's a part of our blue economy, and we need to capture that and take maximum advantage.
Okay. All right. And Rian, your engagement with the study and obviously with the field of the blue economy, how do you come to be in this space?
Well, thank you for that question, Diana, and good afternoon to our audience. Basically, how I became into this space is really a passion for the marine environment and an understanding for the need to protect Jamaica's marine resources. Again, just to reinforce, Jamaica's marine space is 24 times larger than land space. And so a lot of activities that will happen for Jamaica will have some sort of tie to the marine space. And so it's very important that we find the balance between economic growth and environmental protection. So that really piqued my interest to be a part of this study. And, kudos to CAPRI for taking on this report, as well as the EU for recognizing the importance and the need for a sustainable blue economy.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we already have some questions coming in on Slido, and we encourage you to go to Slido, event code CAPRI, put your questions, but also you can vote questions up if you see a question that you would like to hear answered. We did also, besides the study, go out and do something of a vox pop, where we asked particularly stakeholders, people who are already in the sector, some of the questions that came up in the report. And so I'd like to first play the first video that we have of that, and then we'll take that as a jumping off point for the next section of the discussion. If we could have that first video, please.
Jamaica, the largest English-speaking island in the Caribbean, has a maritime space almost 24 times larger than its land area. The blue economy, which includes activities like fishing and tourism in the water, contributes 7% to the country's GDP. Despite this, there is dissatisfaction among stakeholders with the current efforts of policymakers in managing this extensive maritime space. Alexander Lorne, university student and fisherman, points out that his main challenges when fishing in Kingston Harbor are oil spills and plastic pollution.
Main challenges, what can I say? Sometimes like oil spill, because I've mainly with net fishing in the harbor, so I can tell you most of the things in the harbor, like oil spills, like debris, garbage, rubbish. A lot of those stuff kind of contribute to the fishing. You take up buckles with bait inside of it and all these things. So most of the fish are dying out. For oil spills, it run the fish out the harbor. So sometimes, so like months, the harbor dry, you can't find the bait. So it's kind of hard for the fisherman then to get bait to go to sea. Usually you can catch fish in the harbor. Now you have to go further and further and further. There's always how far you can go, you understand?
President of the Port Royal Fishing Cooperative, Michael Henry, adds that there is a noticeable decline in both the size and the number of fish available in areas that were typically abundant for fishermen.
We have a decline in fishing and the fishes that we're seeing. The size of the fish that we are even selling now is declining, and also the ships that is anchoring on the shelf outside the south shelf, is destroying the coral reef. So what it actually do is change run the fish them from the area that they feed and going to a different habitat and all of that. So it's now struggling for the fishers to catch fish now.
Meanwhile, Managing Director of CV Caribbean, Yuri Vernier, emphasizes that for the blue economy to thrive, it requires sustainable planning.
When you deal with the blue economy, you deal with long-term vision, and that's always quite challenging because some of the stakeholders don't have a long-term vision. When you look at the government, usually populated by politicians, I should say, it's a shorter-term vision that they have. So there's a bit of a disconnect between short-term effects that the politics want and the long-term vision that the blue economy would require to have a sustainable effect and really work for the planet, actually.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm actually going to take one of the Slido questions, which I think follows very nicely from that, and put it to each of you, which is, what, in your view, especially from where you sit, is the biggest threat to the blue economy, and most importantly, who are the most empowered to address it? I'll put it to you first, Mr. Cotton.
Thank you so much. And I think I would again start by saying the blue economy remains an opportunity, an opportunity that currently is not being maximized here in Jamaica, and an opportunity that is being severely threatened. Now, one could argue, and two of those core areas were mentioned, the issue concerning climate change, the issue concerning the continued degradation and decline of our coastal and marine biodiversity, whether that be coral reefs, mangroves, seagrass beds. And I would add to that pollution, but not just solid waste and plastics, all forms of pollution. As a small island, and Jamaica is one of the larger of the small islands, everything that happens on land eventually gets to the sea, whether through the gullies, the rivers, or wherever. So the impact of untreated sewage is a major issue, contributing nutrients, which then affect the marine environment. We already heard of the impacts of plastics and solid waste. And then we also have poor agricultural practices and the improper use of fertilizers and chemicals. So those, I would say, are the core things. Some of these may be not as much power to control, like climate change. And that's where I think Jamaica and many other small islands, we need to continue to lobby in the international arena for positions that benefit us as small islands. But there are also a number of things, actions that we can take. So as the question asked, who is empowered? We have to have the users of the resource, and it was highlighted in the presentation, the fishermen, the communities, the private sector involved in the tourism industry. They have to be part of the solution, because not only do they stand to benefit, but in a way, one must say that they at times are part of the problem in terms of what they contribute. And then the government. the policymakers? How do they get engaged?
Okay. Professor Weber, what's your take on that question?
I would have to agree 100% with Chris. The problem, climate change is our number one issue, whether we recognize it or not, and it's already here. But we exacerbate a lot of the issues with climate change with our behavior and what we do. So I won't repeat what he said. I'll jump to the other side and say, so who's responsible? We're all responsible. And it has to be both a top-down and bottom-up. So we, for instance, at the university, we provide the research which gives the policymakers the power, the authority to take the decisions. But then it has to be something that the man on the ground, the woman on the ground recognize that this is something that's going to benefit us so that we can enable what is going to happen. It's a balance that needs to be struck, and it starts with the sharing of information, and sessions such as this with CAPRI's putting on allows people to know more about different systems and what needs to happen. So I think it's all hands on deck if we're going to get it right.
And Rian, both in the research for this report and in the other work that you're doing, what comes up mostly as threats, and what is the recognition of who is supposed to be dealing with these? So, we interview fishermen and we hear them kind of deflecting, perhaps. And I think that is something that is often done in issues like this. There's a lot of deflection. In the research and in the work you're doing, what is coming up as the threats, and what are stakeholders' understandings of who is responsible?
Right. Well, I would say, depending on who you talk to, will determine what the threat is. So again, to reiterate what Dr. Weber said, I would say climate change is the biggest threat, but also understanding that we are exacerbating the issue. And then in terms of who is responsible, again, it really comes down to who you speak to, but we're all responsible. We all have our part to play in society. We all influence the marine space in some way, shape, or form, whether you have your agricultural land that's, closer to the mountains and, you don't use the proper practices, and that comes down to the reef. Whether you're driving along in Kingston and you throw something out your car window and then it ends up in the sea, each and every person, how many, almost 3 million people in Jamaica have some sort of influence and should assume some sort of responsibility when it comes to protecting our marine resources. So I think the question shouldn't be who is responsible. We are all responsible. And we need to understand that first before moving forward.
Okay, well, that gives a great opening to another question here on Slido, which is how can, Jamaicans in this instance, but Caribbean people, all of us who are faced with these issues and in this space, get more involved than just a beach cleanup?
Yes, and that's, we need to have more sessions like this. We need to find ways of better communicating. There's a lot of good science and research, including what has just been done, but also what's being done by the university. But I would say a lot of that is not being transformed into knowledge that the general public and policymakers and it can uptake. So I think part of the challenge to all of us and all of the scientists is communicating this information in a way that makes sense to a fisherman or a community or a stakeholder. So I think that's something that needs to be focused on. And then I think we need to use the opportunities to realize that we are now communicating in a very different world, whether it be social media, the news releases. So we need to find ways of packaging the message in a way that resonates so that it's not this, well, that's not my responsibility, it's the government. And to listen to the stakeholder talking about, he could see the impacts of oil spills on fish. He could see the decline in the fish, but maybe that relationship is not being made. And I think part of what we need to do is help make those connections so that people are more engaged in being part of the solution.
Why haven't we done such a good job of that?
I think the problem with connection is communication. And I'm going to add again to what Chris said. The communication has to come from various levels. Did you know that Jamaica now has a minister for water, environment, climate change, and the blue and green economies? Yes, we've already made the move. So the political directorate has made the move. Now we need to share the information and get the various ministries to work together with that ministry as it permeates. But I'll take it from the other end. I think we need to do a lot more within our schools. Our school settings need to have more of the information about the environment, about the need for us to protect the environment. I mean, I don't want to call the generation my age the last generation, but it is the next generation that will now need to clean up what we've made a problem. So I think as we get through the school system, we're better able to communicate with the young ones who are then able to make their own form of communication happen so that the information gets shared. Reaching them early, I think, is important.
And in the research, Ren, did that come up in terms of a greater desire for information, for ways of understanding how people can have more agency over these issues, not only the stakeholders and the policymakers, but maybe the stakeholders who don't have as much influence or have as much resources to work with? How did that come through in the report?
So as we've done the research, you really see that there's a lack of communication across the sectors. And yes, the report focuses on the three main sectors: tourism, fisheries, finance. But across the board, education is a huge factor as well that should be a part of the conversation. So that does come up. And one of the main takeaways, or one of the biggest recommendations that were made in the report, is increased collaboration between all levels, government, private sector, community-based organizations, so that everyone is working together for the objectives of sustainable development of the blue economy. And then you go back within your sector, your private entity, and you say, okay, what are the objectives we can now make in our smaller group that will align with those larger objectives that will contribute to the development of the blue economy?
Okay, so I think one of the things that did come out in what all of you said is that we're not starting from zero here. There are already initiatives. There's issues to do with take-up, communication, awareness. And the other vox pop we did, or the second of the three vox pops we did, spoke to that, of some of the policies that are in place already to do with communication awareness, but in other areas, and some of the issues with the take-up in the second set of interviews that we did.
2023, Minister with responsibility for the blue and green economies, Matthew Samuda, discussed the Jamaica Blue Economy Framework Project. The initiative aims to provide a cohesive strategy addressing gaps in various sectors with a focus on sustainability. While policymakers are building out frameworks, stakeholders believe there is still much work to be done. Mr. Henry asserts that although steps have been taken by NEPA to identify areas as spawning grounds for fish, more actions are required to adequately safeguard the sector.
There are steps that have been taken by the NEPA, and which we welcome it. In terms of identifying places where areas in the sea where they can deem as areas where fish can spawn and all of that, where fishers were not able to go and fish, because right now we have a drawback with the fish. It's happening with the nets that is coming in our country. Nets that China had banned in their country that is coming out in our area. The shrimps net, it's doing a lot of damage, and the government is taking steps. I think they can do more in terms of the size nets that we are using and all of that.
Mr. Lorne acknowledges the fishing bans on conch and lobster, but suggests that policymakers should improve by aligning the closed season with the spawning periods of these species.
Well, they're trying to. Well, they're doing so in terms of the bands, conch bands and the lobster bands and so, for try to give them time for breed up. Maybe they don't understand it as much for say the time when they might put the band, whether they might lay egg them time they from them now lay egg them time. So they probably need to do more investigation to know when the right time for band, from catching them, because you probably tell them to catch them when they might lay egg, and then by the time they can't catch it. Yeah, so maybe they need to do more investigation on that. Policy wise, yeah, they step up the for say recruitment of fishermen for the license, and so they step that up, because usually anybody can get a fishing license, and everybody have the protective idea of the environment. So not like anybody get fishing license, you have to have little something about it nowadays to kind of do that. Yeah. So them kind of check your background.
Outreach Officer at the Port Royal Marine Laboratory, Janelle Irvin, notes great strides in safeguarding the blue economy. However, she emphasizes the need for additional funding to further support the sector.
A great addition so far has been the implementation of more marine protected areas or special fishery conservation areas, and those spaces just help to regulate fishing within certain parts of the near shore. So now we just have places where fishing is just not allowed so that the natural fish stocks can be restored over time. And we know that's important because we rely so heavily on fish for food and for income generation. And when these MPAs, marine protected areas, work properly and function properly, they do a great deal of good, right? But of course, for them to function properly, it requires meaningful funding and resourcing, right? We need we need to get the equipment that we need. The managers need the money to hire the personnel required to be boots on the ground to monitor these spaces day in and day out. Because a park without proper management is just a paper park, and that doesn't help as much as we think or they believe that it's helping, right?
So one of the things that I think has come up here, and it has come up in the report, and this is actually a pervasive issue across all sectors in Jamaica, is the lack of capacity. We have policies, we have great speeches, we have great announcements, we launch things, we open things, but we tend not to have the capacity to sustain them, see them to their full potential. And I think one of the things that came through in the report, in the recommendations, and it also was referred to, whether directly or indirectly in these interviews, was the issue of the marine spatial plan. And there's actually also a question in Slido about it. So Rianne, talk to us a little bit about what the marine spatial plan is, why it's so important, and then ask the other panelists to just comment on why we haven't managed to get that key element of the blue economy going.
Okay, so the marine spatial plan really looks at how extensive the resources can be managed sustainably. So we understand that there are a lot of different stakeholders that are dependent on the marine resources. So you have fishermen, there's shipping, there's there's different sectors, and we want to allow everyone to use those resources and grow economically from using those resources, but then not at the expense of the environment. So the marine spatial plan really looks at, this is what we have here, here, and there. This is which sectors use these areas. These are the potential impacts and how we can mitigate those impacts so that there's a balance between the economic growth and the environmental protection. The report also highlights that there are some challenges. So the legislative framework is there, but one of the issues is enforcement, and then also the integration. So two different sectors are competing for this for the marine resources in this particular space. And because they're both competing, as a result, the environmental degradation, you can really see it in this area more than in another area. And it's a bit challenging because you're dealing with competition and all these different stakeholders, and then you have the glooming threat of climate change. Mm-hmm. So the Marine Spatial Plan really looks to address all these challenges and issues while making sure that each stakeholder is also benefiting. So I think it's important when looking at a comprehensive marine spatial plan to really have someone from each sector at that conversation and say, what do you need? What do you need? Okay, how can we work together? Maybe you can do it this way so that it doesn't degrade the environment so much, and then making that plan so that everyone can benefit equally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What has been the issue? Why don't we have this key thing that seems to be so important for us to move forward?
And I would add to that by saying this is not unique to Jamaica.
Okay, good.
It is as a regional convention. Although we are based in Jamaica, we do cover all of the countries in the region, and this is a concern that comes up over and over again. First of all, with land use planning, and you heard in the presentation some of the concerns in terms of the types of development that we have had, where certain activities have been approved, and the impacts that they're having on the coastal and marine space. We actually have two instruments, one on pollution and one on marine biodiversity. Jamaica has signed on to the pollution one. We are hoping that they sign on to our specially protected areas and wildlife protocol, but they have both identified the importance of a marine spatial plan, the importance of the conflict resolution, because small island developing states have a special vulnerability in the context that we have a limited resource and significant demand by multiple sectors. So we are not all going to get what we want, but we have to be able to get together towards, I think was mentioned, that common vision. Where does Jamaica want to move? And therefore, how can we develop a marine spatial plan that might require some level of compromise, but in the bigger interest of everyone, economic development and sustainability?
Jamaicans who are watching, Dr. Webber, who are hearing this for the first time, marine spatial plan, and kind of realizing, okay, this is something important. What would you say has been some of the roadblocks here specifically to us getting to that? And what are some of the easier things that we might work on to try and get to that point, that we might move out of the way?
So a marine spatial plan is, as it says, for the marine environment. We have pretty good spatial plans for our land areas. Town planning does a brilliant job with that, and NEPA with its organization. It is, how do you do the same thing in the marine environment? What is there? How much of it is there? Evaluating it, not just for its presence, but the ecosystem service that it provides. Because being there means it does a certain thing. Added to that, there are new features, for instance, blue carbon, which now takes away some of the carbon from our climate change issues. So spatial planning gives us a feel for what's there, but it gives us, with the limited resources left in terms of physical resources, what should we do where? What should we do together? And I'm very pleased to have read in the report that it brings together, as we move to the concept of blue financing, that everybody needs to share. So tourism, fishing, transport, ports, all need to get together as we decide, how do we take the funding that's going to make conserving or restoring those areas important? And the spatial plan tells us where we should be doing what, where we should be allowing things, where we should not be allowing things, and how we should move forward.
Okay. I think the other big thing that came up in the report, and is also a concern of many of the questions, is the tourism industry. And Ariane didn't go into a lot of detail in the presentation, but in the report itself, there is a discussion about the incompatibility of the dominant model that we're now practicing, where we're celebrating 4 million people, 5 million visitors, and what the implications are for the marine environment. And then the report talks about how the blue economy approach can perhaps mitigate some of that impact. But my sense from the report is that perhaps is going to be a really difficult bridge to bring together the kind of going to call them the mainstream tourism interests and the blue economy concerns about the dominant model. And if you could talk a little bit, Rihanna, about what the report said, and then I'd ask the panelists to just give some feedback on that.
Great. So one of the things that we found in the report, which was alarming to me specifically, is that a lot of visitors to the island now actually want to engage in more eco-friendly or environmental activities. So the mass tourism model, yes, it still exists and it's still dominant, but you do have a lot of persons asking, where can I do some snorkeling? Where can I do a hike? Where can I, so the report asks or suggests that the government actually review the current tourism model, because there is a need, or there's a want, there's a demand for, you know, more eco-friendly ecotourism, marine tourism, pleasure crafts. You know, not everything is about the big hotels and all inclusive and that sort of thing. So, and what's great about that is in incorporating ecotourism and those things, you have the opportunity to work with community-based organizations and fish sanctuaries and community members. And so you're really creating this holistic model that persons, when they come into Jamaica, they're experiencing the beauty outside of the hotel. And yes, they can access the hotel, they stay there, they have access to all the nice things that the hotel offers, but they also have access sustainably to offerings from the community, from the NGOs, and so on. And one of the more important things in the report says that if tourism and fisheries can work together, then that creates a really, really special partnership, support for the NGOs, the fish sanctuaries, the people who are on the ground that are working every day to make sure that fish stocks are restored, that the coral reefs are coming back, that the mangroves are being replanted, or, you know, and so I think moving forward, you know, when we're looking at tourism, yes, it's contributing a great deal to GDP, and we love visitors that are coming to the island, but let's change, you know, what they're coming for. Let's promote a more eco-friendly. When persons come to Jamaica, they need to, their first thought should be, you know, I want to see the natural beauty, and I want to help protect it, and I want to help promote it as well, and really work that into the tourism model.
How is that actually, these ideas, you know, the report points out there's a lot of potential. It seems like the market is already there, but doesn't seem to be filtering into what we're actually seeing on a, you know, on a day-to-day basis of what's actually being offered. I mean, as a Jamaican who lives here, I find it hard to access some of these things, even though I should have all the information I need. What is it that is happening on the ground, no pun intended, why we're not able to realize a lot of the potential that the report talks about in the blue economy tourism model?
That's an interesting question, and this is one for me, yes?
Yes, it is.
And I think the report, and Ryan spoke to it, how do you capitalize some of the things that you want to have happen? Every protected area, every park should have an opportunity for snorkeling, for diving, for opportunities. Every marine area that has the potential so to do, as long as it can be carefully managed, should have such an opportunity. And I think if we're able to put some of the funds that we're talking about from this now blue bonds to make the NGOs, the CBOs, the small entities that are there, tool them to the point where they can invite all of this participation in what is using the blue economy. There are some things happening, and we need to just give them the credit and be able to stretch it. Again, the report speaks to it. The Tourism Enhancement Fund is an area that clearly we should be using more of, but it has been used. In fact, the Tourism Enhancement Fund paid for half of what we got, the university paid for the other half, for the only hyperbaric chamber in the island, which allows diving, safe diving in Jamaica. Now we should be doing more diving and using that as part of our blue economy. So there are opportunities and there are ways to do it. And I think we've started, we just need to push a little more and open a few more doors and get more of our communities involved.
And what's the regional approach to this in terms of, well, for all the areas that you cover, how are they getting to bridge the potential and the reality, and bearing in mind that we're in a way losing time in that gap?
Yes, we are. And Jamaica, I would say, when we compared to a number of the small islands, has more to offer in terms of tourism, its culture, its food, its terrestrial. But for so many of the small islands, it is only the sea that the entire tourism industry is based upon. And we have seen that even puts a greater pressure on how do you engage with the sector. And I'm going to take now as maybe a slightly different spin in terms of the hotels and the industry that we have. How can we ensure now that their practices are more sustainable, from how they do their waste management practices, their sewage, their wastewater practices. Are they reusing water? Are they engaged with local communities, as you mentioned, with fishermen, and in terms of protection of coral reefs, doing mangrove restoration? Because we have to be able to also engage with them, not only as the source of the problem, but a significant part of the solution in terms of the practices they can employ. This, of course, speaks to legislation, it speaks to policy, it speaks to enforcement, so that when new tourism developments come and they want to build a foot away from the beach, that there are systems in place that say, no, we need a buffer.
Yeah.
You know, we can build across the road and access the beach in that way. So we safeguard that vital resource. And we're seeing that happening. A lot more needs to be done in a number of the other countries. But we also have the examples from outside of our region. How is the Pacific dealing with this? How are some of those countries that, for example, don't allow any buildings higher than 2 or 3 stories to be built along the coastline, so that you maintain a vista to the sea and have more community engagement? So I think we need to, as you say, relook at the model that we are so used to and learn from what's happening in other parts of the world.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you each just a few seconds, 30 to 60 seconds, to just give some last words. Those who are watching this, listening, who are interested in the topic, who want to be able to know where to go next. If there's one thing you would like people to take away from this discussion and from the thinking and the potential on the blue economy, what would it be? To you, Dr. Weber, first.
I would say get involved, get knowledgeable, get involved, participate. I know that there are many who are going to look at Pedro and should be doing more conch fishing or more oil exploration, but that's at one end. At the local end, where you sit, where you have your interest, get involved, get the information, participate. We will meet you partway.
Okay. Rianne, your last words, especially as having done all the work on this report.
Yes. I would say all hope is not lost, and there is there's an extreme potential for diversification, and I would say have an open mind. What we're used to for the past 20, 30 years, it has worked, but you know, there are a lot of things now that we have to take into consideration, and things need to change. Also, you know, there's power in numbers, so advocacy on a local level. Share your thoughts with your local MPs. Don't be afraid, because it will, you know, the more people that speak on it, the more they will listen.
All right, and I'll give you the last word.
Don't get lost in the terminology. We're hearing it, blue economy. Tomorrow it might be something else, but this is all about our daily needs. It matters to all of us, particularly all of us who live in small islands. So it's something that we all need to be aware of. We all need to take the opportunity, and we all need to see how can this benefit us in our day-to-day lives. This is not some vague concept that's out there. This is what we do, and this is how we live as Caribbean people.
Yes, thank you so much for this very rich discussion and your insights and perspectives. And I think I would echo what Mr. Corbin said. You know, when I first heard the term blue economy, I wasn't actually very sure what it meant. And the terminology can get in the way. And, you know, hopefully this report will be a first step in getting past the terminology for people to understand that these are issues that are affecting all of us. And there is a great deal of scope for us all to be able to participate in the discussion, the debate, and pushing our policymakers to make change and take action, and to take action and make change ourselves. I'm going to turn over back now to Dominique to close out this event.
Thank you, Diana. And thanks to this evening's presenter, Ms. Rayanne McKenzie, for laying out the foundation for tonight's discussion. Our moderator, Dr. Thorburn, spearheaded a rich conversation. And we are also grateful to our panelists, Mr. Corbin of the Cartagena Convention Secretariat, and Professor Weber of the Center for Marine Sciences for participating. We would also like to once more acknowledge and thank this event's sponsor, the EU in Jamaica, as well as the other good corporate citizens who support CAPRI's work in the public interest throughout the year. The report, Sea of Opportunity, Developing Jamaica's Blue Economy, can be found on our website at capricaribbean.org for download. Our next report launch will be in April, our annual, highly anticipated budget breakdown. Stay tuned to our social media platforms for more information. Thank you for joining us. Have a pleasant evening.